Imagine standing on Spadina Avenue today, streetcars rolling past, cyclists weaving through traffic, the smell of Kensington Market drifting through the air. Chinatown buzzing on both sides of the street. One of the most alive, most human corridors in all of Canada. Now imagine a 6-lane concrete trench running through the middle of it. Hundreds of homes demolished. The Annex, Cedarvale, Nordhamer Ravine, all torn apart. Kensington Market cut in half, that was the plan. And it almost happened. This is the story of the Spadina Expressway, the highway that would have changed Toronto forever. And the ordinary people who refused to let it be built. Stay with us. Because the twist at the end of this story, nobody saw it coming. To understand the Spadina Expressway, you have to understand what Toronto looked like in 1943. The city was booming. Soldiers were coming home. Suburbs were being carved out of farmland in every direction. And like every other major North American city at the time, Toronto's planners had one answer for the future: build highways. That year, the City of Toronto Planning Board drew up a master plan, a web of superhighways that would cut through the city in every direction. A lakeshore expressway along the waterfront, an east-west crosstown, and a north-south expressway running right down the spine of the city, connecting the growing suburbs of North York to the downtown core. They called it the Spadina Expressway. On paper, it looked like progress. A sleek, modern artery. The future. Nobody asked the people who lived in its path. For almost 2 decades, the Spadina Expressway sat in planning documents, occasionally debated, never quite built. Then, in 1962, Metro Toronto Council approved it. Construction was authorized. The machine was in motion. Work began in 1963 from Wilson Avenue heading south toward Lawrence. Priority was given to serving a massive new development just off the route, the Yorkdale Shopping Center, which was threatening to cancel its construction if the highway wasn't built. The developers got their wish. Yorkdale opened in 1964, and the expressway stub that fed it opened with it. The highway crept south. Lawrence. Then further approvals were granted to push it toward Eglinton. Bulldozers chewed through land. Homes were expropriated. Families were paid and pushed out. By 1969, construction had reached Eglinton Avenue, less than halfway through the planned route, and had already burned through almost its entire $79 million budget. Here's where it gets interesting. To go further south, Metro Toronto needed to go back to the Ontario Municipal Board and borrow more money. Millions more. And that hearing, that routine bureaucratic request for funds, would turn out to be the moment ordinary Torontonians finally got their opening. The resistance didn't start with famous names or political movements. It started with 2 women on a street in the Annex. In the fall of 1968, Bobby Speck and Lorraine Van Riet, neighbors, mothers, ordinary residents, looked at the planned route on a map and realized what was coming. The expressway would cut directly through their neighborhood. They started making phone calls, then more phone calls. Then they started knocking on doors. They formed a small committee. They lobbied councilors. They connected residents' associations across the city. And then, at the end of that summer, they passed their work on to a new arrival in the neighborhood, a woman who had just moved from New York City with her 3 kids, and who had already beaten one of the most powerful city planners in American history. Her name was Jane Jacobs. Jacobs was already famous. Her 1961 book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, had turned urban planning upside down. She had spent years fighting Robert Moses, the man who bulldozed the Bronx to build his expressways, and she had won. Moses had wanted to run the Lower Manhattan Expressway through Greenwich Village. Jacobs and her neighbors stopped him cold. And then she moved to Toronto and found the exact same fight waiting for her. She moved into a house on Spadina Road, right in the path of the proposed highway. She later said she almost couldn't believe it. In October 1969, the movement officially organized under the name that would define a generation of Toronto activism, the Stop Spadina, Save Our City Coordinating Committee. It was led by University of Toronto professor Alan Powell. Its membership was unlike anything Toronto had seen before: students, academics, lawyers, housewives, shopkeepers, artists, professors. Everyone who stood to lose something if the bulldozers kept moving south. They were smart and they were relentless. They packed public meetings. They lobbied every councillor they could reach. They collected a petition with 15,709 signatures, one of the largest citizen petitions ever submitted to a Toronto government body at that point. And then they made a movie. Jane Jacobs and Marshall McLuhan, two of the most important intellectual figures in North America, sat down together and wrote a short documentary film called The Burning Wood. The title was a pun on a line from James Joyce. The film laid out in plain terms what the Expressway would do to Toronto, and it screened across North America. McLuhan's message was direct. He reportedly said Toronto would commit suicide if it plunged the Spadina Expressway into its heart. When asked to speak at a screening and unable to attend, he sent 3 words to be read on his behalf: "Forget your ego." The battle split Toronto in two. On one side, suburban councillors, commuters, developers, and business groups who wanted the highway finished. They argued it was necessary, that the traffic would only get worse, that the city had already spent $79 million and stopping now would be throwing it all away. On the other side, inner-city residents, activists, and a growing block of Toronto city councillors who saw exactly what expressways had done to American cities. Detroit, Baltimore, the South Bronx. They had watched middle-class families flee city cores along the very highways that were supposed to bring people together. And they wanted no part of it. The expressway became the defining issue of the 1969 municipal election. A young lawyer and Stop Spadina member named John Sewell ran for Toronto City Council on a pure anti-expressway platform. He won. Other reform candidates won alongside him. The council was shifting. But here was the problem. Toronto City Council alone couldn't stop it. The Spadina Expressway was a Metro Toronto project, funded partly by the province of Ontario. City Council could object all it wanted, and it did, but the final decision lay with Metro Council and ultimately with the province. The opponents needed to win at a level they didn't control, and they were running out of time. The bulldozers were still moving. Early 1971, the Ontario Municipal Board held formal hearings on Metro Toronto's request for funds to continue construction south of Eglinton. The Stop Spadina forces went in prepared. They formed a new legal entity, the Spadina Review Corporation, and hired one of Canada's most celebrated trial lawyers, J.J. Robinette, to argue their case. They presented economic analysis, community impact studies, environmental arguments. They brought in expert witnesses. They made the case that this highway would not save Toronto. It would hollow it out just like it had hollowed out American cities. Metro's case rested on traffic projections and technical studies. The highway was needed, they argued. The traffic data proved it. The OMB ruled 2-1 in favor of continuing construction. The opponents had lost. The highway was going ahead, but there was one more move left. The Stop Spadina coalition did something that had never really been done before in Toronto civic politics. They went over everyone's head. They wrote directly to Premier Bill Davis. They lobbied his cabinet ministers. They made the case not to Metro Toronto, not to the OMB, but to the provincial government of Ontario itself. And on June 3, 1971, Bill Davis stood up in the Ontario legislature and made an announcement that nobody expected. He was canceling the Spadina Expressway. His words became famous. He told the legislature, "If we are building a transportation system to serve the automobile, the Spadina Expressway would be a good place to start. But if we are building a transportation system to serve people, the Spadina Expressway is a good place to stop." The reaction was immediate. An architect named Colin Vaughan, one of the masterminds of the Spadina Review Corporation, was photographed that night on Yonge Street, raising a stein of beer in celebration. The photo ran on the front page of the Toronto Star the next morning. The highway was dead, and with it, every other planned expressway in Toronto's original master plan. One by one, Metro quietly abandoned the Crosstown, the Scarborough Expressway, the Richview. The age of the Toronto superhighway was over. It had been stopped by two women making phone calls in the annex. The victory was real, but the scars were too. The northern section of the expressway, the part that had already been built between Highway 401 and Eglinton, wasn't torn down. It was renamed William R. Allen Road and left in place, a stub expressway that dumps thousands of cars onto Eglinton every day and solves exactly nothing. And here's the detail that haunts it most. In 1985, 14 years after the cancellation, the province actually leased the city of Toronto a strip of land just 3 feet wide and 750 feet long, running along the Right-of Way south of Eglinton. The purpose was to physically block any future government from ever reviving the extension. They didn't trust a handshake agreement. They made it legal. The ghost of the highway was so persistent that they had to kill it twice. Walk around the annex today and you can still find its traces. The new college building at the University of Toronto has a windowless wall facing Spadina. The architects knew the expressway was coming and didn't bother putting windows on that side. The Toronto Archives building sits unusually far from the street. The setback was designed to accommodate a highway that was never finished. Ben Nobleman Park, just south of Allen Road, sits on land that was expropriated for the route and never built upon. The city is full of ghosts like this, places shaped by a future that never came. The Spadina Expressway fight changed Toronto in ways that are still playing out today. It proved that citizens could stop a government project that was already under construction, already funded, and already approved by the courts. It launched political careers. John Sewell, the lawyer who ran on stopping Spadina, eventually became mayor of Toronto. The reform movement it sparked reshaped city council for a generation. It made Jane Jacobs a Canadian icon. She stayed in Toronto until her death in 2006, still writing, still fighting, still watching the city she loved. And it permanently changed the way Toronto thinks about its streets. Next time you ride the Spadina streetcar through Kensington Market, or walk through the annex on a Saturday afternoon, or sit in Cedarvale Park and listen to the birds, you're standing in the place the bulldozers never reached. You're standing in the city that fought back. If you're from Toronto, this is your history. Subscribe for more stories of the GTA, the moments, the fights, and the people who made this city what it is.